So today we were talking about communication, collaboration, and engagement, designing using user-driven SharePoint experience. So let's dive straight in and see how we get on. So Upriver Creative is my agency, and we're a digital design agency predominantly. So the agenda for today, I'll give you a brief background about me. We'll have a chat about SharePoint and why we're looking at it. We'll talk about the importance of your brand. Why does it matter to you in this particular instance? What does your brand have to do with SharePoint? What does SharePoint look like when it's straight out of the box? What value is there in using a designer? So people like me. Some client challenges, which I'm sure many people will read them and see, actually, yes, I face all of those. They come from clients. And then, of course, we'll have some questions at the end. As Nigel said, I'm no scientist, but I do have pharma clients, and I have been working with pharma clients for quite a few years. I am a creative digital designer. Currently, that would be my title, but I've been in the business for so long that actually I've done all sorts of design work, from branding, promotional design, collateral design, advertising, HTML, emails, the whole remit. So I have a very broad core skill. In fact, when I started, I actually was using a drawing board. The good old days when we had drawing board and we had marker pens, and everything was done by hand, and it took so much longer. But now, obviously, everything's digital. So I specialize in the creative area using website design and SharePoint design. Went to Epsom Art College way back in the day. I have been the managing director of Upriver Creative, which my wife and I started last June. Prior to that, I had been with one business from leaving art college till the middle of the year. And I became managing director of that business. So I went from junior designer to MD. But we got to the point where it was kind of now or never to do it myself. So we stepped away, and so far we're going quite well. But hey, keep our fingers crossed and touch wood, as everybody says. Just so that you can see some of the clients I've dealt with over the years, quite a few household names in there, quite a few businesses that people will recognise, PepsiCo, Tesco's, Diageo, and obviously other smaller clients that people may not recognise, like Carlsberg, Ericsson, Bupa. But yeah, there are some smaller businesses as well. It's not just all blue chip enterprise level businesses. We work for smaller businesses as well, but always deliver the same high level of service. So why are we going to talk about SharePoint? So I've been working with it for many years. I've worked with it since it started back in, we worked with SharePoint 2007. I've been through all the incarnations of 2010, 2014, 16, and now Modern. As many of you will know, it's very misunderstood, it's underrated, and actually not liked by a lot of people because it is misunderstood, and we'll cover that later on in the presentation. But actually, it is a very versatile tool. It can be used for lots of things. You can use it for document repository. It's a collaboration tool, information site, new joiner site, news site. Many options there. And it gives you options to be creative. You don't have to have it out of the box looking really dull in the way that some people see SharePoint and think, I can't possibly have that. And again, we will look at those things as we come back. For me, it's now become a niche market. Actually, most of my time is spent designing for SharePoint. So without blowing my own trumpet, I'm quite a specialist in the creative design for SharePoint. So most of the work that I've been doing recently has been designing SharePoint sites for 3 clients, and just picking up another one. So it is a core area for us. And obviously SharePoint, for most people, you actually have it as part of your 365 license. So it's actually a really good tool for you to be using. There's a huge amount of storage within SharePoint, and we'll touch on why you should be using it later on. But let's start with the importance of your brand. 2/3 of businesses say consistency has contributed to the growth of at least 10%. Everybody likes growth. Everybody wants their business to be better. So if we can have a consistent brand, then we should be doing that. And that runs through everything, as we'll look at. So actually, why are we talking about it? So you're actually selling an experience. You're not actually selling a product. If you think about it that way, contrary to popular belief, you are actually selling an experience or your feelings or the ideologies. If you take Coca-Cola, for example, they know the experience they want to sell to their customers. So they've got a very good product, but people buy it because of the experience and the feeling you get around Coca-Cola. And they've spent millions of pounds building that brand, as many other businesses have. So whether you're big or small, your brand really is important to you. So if you're working for yourself, you still have a brand. If you're working for a bigger business, you still have a brand. So what is it? It's your identity. It's the story of you, story of your company. It's not just your logo. It's the way that you stand out from the crowd. Everything you do should be branded in a way that people will recognize it instantly. So for example, you can see on mine, I've got two strong colors in black. The fonts we use, that's all part of your branding, but also the terminology you use, the way you express it. So even the language that you use within your text, you should ensure that that is within your brand. So it should be on brand for everything. But your brand obviously sets your goals, it sets your mind space, it's an effective communication tool. So what is a brand? It's a process for creating your identity for the company. So you have all your supporting material, and as we've just talked about, we've talked about having a logo, we've talked about your tagline, design style, tone of voice. All of this is important to reiterate and push your brand in front of everybody. What's the importance of it? Well, along with your employees, it actually is your biggest asset. It is your identity. It's what makes you memorable. It's what encourages consumers to deal with you. It is an influencing factor on purchases for people. I was looking at a survey that said 82% of people buy from businesses because they believe in the brand and it is part of their decision making. 67% of buyers thinks it makes them a better person if they're buying a brand that's environmentally friendly. So all the way down the line, that brand is key to where you are and how you sell yourself and you sell your business. Creating identity for your business, it's beyond just the product. We've talked about it. It is your service. It is you. It's how the consumers relate and connect with you. But it'll help your customers remember. So you can see Coca-Cola, you instantly know what that is. You recognize it, you've seen it, and you don't need to be told that they sell a drink. You know what that is. They can tell you, they can sell you an experience, which goes back to what we said earlier about selling your experience. It boosts your advertising because it's easy. You've got that revenue, you've got that build up, you've got that knowledge. So people, you can sell in different ways rather than the hard sell on your product. But also for your employees, they feel they belong to the company if you've got a really strong brand. If you can say you work for Coca-Cola, you work for Microsoft, you work for Google, people instantly know the sort of business you work for because that brand is so strong. Now, not every business is as big as those, but it's still important for your business, whether there's 2 of you, 10 of you, 200 of you. You want to identify with that business and be proud of that business. So a good brand really helps to reiterate that and build that presence with your employees. So just that, everybody's had these logos before. I'm sure you've all been to pub quizzes where you identify the brand without the brand name. And that's what it means about building your brand, making it so strong you don't need to have a name there. People know who they are without actually having to say, oh yeah, this is so and so. Obviously, these companies have been around a long time and they have spent millions on building their brand, but it's an evolution. You take Adidas, they always have 3 stripes. It's always been 3 stripes. They've changed how it appears, they've changed how it works, but it's always those 3 stripes. BP, again, the evolution of their brand is very different from start to finish, but where they are now is still the 3 core colors. It's still the simple font. It's still the same structure. Ferrari haven't changed a lot, but yeah, people can recognize that very easily. It's a very strong brand for actually quite a small car manufacturer. But then if we look at your brand, people like to mess around with their logos, and this is why people say all the corporate brand guidelines say, do not change our logo, do not mess around. This is the Shell logo with the BP colours. That really messes everything up. So somebody sitting in an office somewhere would say, oh yeah, I don't like that red and yellow, I want to have these colours. It's a mixed message that the user doesn't understand. Whilst you may think, oh, it's great, we've made it look really different, or I've made it an environmental Shell logo. Actually, people will look at it and say, I don't know who that is. I know that it should be BP in those colours, but I know the shape should be Shell. So that's why corporate guidelines are really important, no matter how big or small they are. And some are enormous tomes and others are just a couple of pages. But it's important that you always adhere to the guidelines and you don't mess around with the logo, because that's the thing that people start to recognize, and that's where you start to build. So why does it matter to me? What's important? Because you don't necessarily get involved with forward-facing information. Some of you are scientists and it's not your remit. So I just show you an example, and I've used this example of a proposal document. Look, we all get involved in proposals or white papers or information documents. This this actually was a SharePoint audit, and went to a client, not my audit, and at the time it wasn't my client, but they are now. And this document was 30 pages long. It was very intense. It was very text orientated. It was very deep. It didn't really understand the audience, and it really missed the mark. And it wasn't branded by them. It wasn't branded to the company. It was just a heavy document. So this client sat on it for 8 months, and then they approached us and they said, actually, what I need is X. And that X was buried on page 22. So we pulled that out, and now we're creating their website for them, their intranet site for them, and I can show you that in a bit. On the other side of that, I did an audit for one of my clients, and I branded it for them, and I knew who it was going to. It was going to senior management. So they don't want all that deep detail. That's a deep read. They wanted simple, quick facts that were easy to digest. So we pulled it out, we put it in their branding, we made it look much brighter, much more engaging. And the proof in the pudding was I had this back. It's an excellent job. Please pass on my thanks to Mark and request the cost estimate. So we did that, and that's another project that we've got, because it was easier and more simple to digest, and it was branded for them. So that's why at all stages it's important that your brand is there on every document, everything that you do. So what does a brand have to do with SharePoint? So SharePoint, because it is so versatile, you can brand it all the way through. You can change it, you can move it around. A branded site will impact your users, and it will help their engagement, and it will improve the user experience. If it's a good looking site with all of your branding, then people are more likely to engage with it, and they'll remember who they work for. It goes back to that, engaging with your employees to ensure they feel part of the business. This should be their window on your world, on your business. And if it shows that it's branded in the right way, then they will engage with the business more. And then it obviously gives them reasons to return as well. And that's critical. If you're going to spend money on building an intranet site, you need to have reasons to return. You don't want it to be there once, one visit, got what I want, and I'm never going back again. But there are lots of ways where you make reasons to return, but one of them is good branding. So why don't people like SharePoint? So there are lots of reasons why people don't like SharePoint. First of all, a lot of people say it's far too flexible. There's too much there. There are too many controls. One analogy is if you sat in a jumbo jet cockpit, there's so much information in there, you don't know what to do with it all. It's too difficult to understand. Also with SharePoint, there's often a lack of training. People will launch it and then forget to train everybody. And because it can be quite complex, people don't want to use it. They stay away from it. They think there's an excessive learning curve, when actually, if there's good training, it's very simple. You just train them to use the right areas, the small elements they want to do, and then they'll start to use it. Some people say it looks awful, and in some instances it really does, and we'll look at some examples shortly. Another criticism of SharePoint is its search. The search can be difficult to use. people expect a Google search or a Bing search and expect those kind of results, but that's not really what you get from SharePoint. The whole point of SharePoint is it's a big document repository, and if it's tagged correctly, it will find pretty much anything for you, but you just need to work out how to do that. And again, that goes back to your training. If you know how to use it properly, then you can find what you need. But people say they don't have a desire to add all the metadata. They don't want to be tagging this and pushing that. So again, it goes back to your training and how you add information. So what are the benefits of SharePoint? So it's very scalable. You can start with a single hub, and then you can add pages, add hubs to it. You can build on it as you need to. SharePoint Modern is really secure, particularly online. Microsoft has spent a huge amount of money to ensure that it's really safe, difficult to crack. So therefore,
what calendar is this in?
It has multi-purpose uses, which we talked about previously. So, you can use it as a simple news tool. You can use it as a data repository. You can use it for information, collaboration. And it's a great tool to collaborate with because you can share information around. You can ensure there's a single source of truth. People can come to it, make sure they get the right documents. And it's a great project management tool as well. So you can work through with your colleagues on how and where you do certain things. So what does it look like out of the box? We talked about how it could look. So here's an example of out of the box. It gets described as it's a bit like the Wild West. People add sites, build things, throw things at it. This page, for example, has got 3 menus on the home page. There's one across the top, just under the yellow bar. There's one in the middle line, and then there are the buttons across the middle there. It's certainly not an engaging experience. There's nothing that really tells me where I want to go. There's nothing that encourages me to come back. And then if we look at the one in the bottom right-hand side, that's just the next text page down. There's nothing in there again that's engaging me or pulling me into the page. There's another set of links that are going to drive me to some more data, but it's not encouraging me to return. There's nothing there that feels like a good experience. Similarly, another out of the box, slightly tidier, slightly neater, slightly more branded. But actually, when you look at it on the left-hand side, you've got a very long menu. You can see the bar there. It means that menu scrolls a long way to the left. But in the central area, you've got a mix of data. You've got contact numbers, you've got information, you've got useful hubs, so you actually go into different sites. But there's nothing there that says, come and talk to me, come and enjoy my site. And again, you drill down, you've got more buttons, more links, but very little that's engaging the user. And this one came to me just at the beginning of the week, actually, from one of my clients. This is their intranet from Japan. And again, there's nothing in there that engages the user. It's just list after list after list. Even the banner at the top there, although you've got clouds in there, it's not stretched in the right way, so it doesn't repeat. It's repeating rather than a single.
Hey, buddy.
So it's
Sorry, man.
not... Hello.
Well, I think carry on, Mark. I think Don was just saying.
Okay, I'll carry on. So those are out of the box experiences, and there are lots of reasons why people don't like SharePoint and they think it's not an engaging tool. So what's the value in using a designer? So designers like me, we often know how to solve the problem more quickly, and we'll get you your results much more quickly, and therefore that'll be less expensive in the long term. Whilst it does seem expensive to engage with the designer, because we know the system, because we know the shortcomings, we know the ways around things, a designer will really help you move a project forward and make it more exciting. Those previous examples obviously had no designers involved in that. They were just developers, and they built things. They're functional, but not very engaging. So what can we bring? So we understand the user experience, we understand the user interface, and that will bring the design together. We understand branding, so we'll make the site look and feel like all your other parts of the business. so that there's a family feel to everything you do. We can make it look like your external website. We can make it look like other brochures and products within the business, just to ensure that that look and feel has that family expression. We can personalize the design so that you can have it tailored to how you want it. So we'll look at what it needs to do. What does your user want it for? What's the outcome? How do they expect to interact with it? So all those things the designer will understand. We'll also understand the hotspots. And the hotspots are when you land on a web page, where do you look first? What's your first piece of information? What's primary? What's secondary? What's the third place? And what's the last bit that you'll look at? So those are your hotspots. Very typical. Also, we'll have an understanding of the technical side of it. What do the developers need? What are they going to want? How are we going to work with the developers to make sure this is the most efficient build? And really importantly, we're a conduit between the stakeholder and the developer. Obviously, the stakeholder, not necessarily a designer or a developer, has one set of language, wants to do things in a certain way. Developers have another set of language and want to do it their way. And the designer sits nicely in the middle. We talk to the stakeholder, we understand what they want. We develop that into the visuals and the design, and then we talk to the developers, who often say, no, that can't be done. And then they'll go away, spend 5 minutes and go, yeah, I can do that actually. Let me just work this around. So we are that way of making sure that everything happens and it all runs smoothly. It's a bit of an art, it's a bit of a science, but designers are there to help you all the way through the process. So talking of processes, this is the process that we use when we start to look at a website. We'll sit down and we'll do analysis, we'll do a workshop, we'll look at the long-term goals, the short-term goals, define the audience, understand their needs, and look at their user journeys. We'll build the architecture, we'll look at the content groupings, the requirements. Then we'll wireframe it to a point where you start to feel the structure of the site, where elements are going to go, how do we get to certain information, what is it, where will it appear, how many clicks will the user take to get there. Then you get to the exciting bit, which is the visual design. We bring color into it, we bring it to life, give you page designs. Then you go through the development process, which is having been really engaged on the first three areas, the development goes off on its own. The developers have a period, and there's not much you can do in between starting development and getting it ready for testing. And then you start to test it. And that's where the challenges come. Did we build it correctly? Does it do all the things you want it to do? Is all the information in the correct places? And then once you've released it to live, then we'll support it and continue to look after the site and help you through. Talked about wireframing. So this is a wireframe for a site. So what the designer will do will not only wireframe it for your screen version, but we'll look at the mobile version as well. If you need your site to be responsive, then we look at both versions and how does it change from one screen size to the other. And these are all the things that a designer will know and understand without actually having to work really hard at it and play around. That said, SharePoint Modern actually is very good at just going from screen to mobile without too much extra effort from the designer or the developer. It's created in such a way that it works really well to do that on its own. So what can SharePoint look like? So this is one we're working on right now. So we've started to brand this. We've created the name for the site, which means future in Japanese. So it has a Japanese feel because the business is Japanese parent company, but this is their European division. So the slight Japanese feel to the banner. There's lots of good imagery in there. There's a reason why I'm coming to the page. I'm coming for the latest news. I can get to the different page areas within the site through clear signposting. I can get to the quick links that will take me to all the different places. And then once you get into the inner pages, again, there's good imagery that makes the page exciting and interesting and makes me want to come to the page. And simple messaging on the right-hand side to find different areas. Production Packing are a company that deal with the film industry, actually. So it's important that they track everything. So they move film sets, props, information for films around, so things like the latest Bond film or Mission Impossible. So clearly, when they're moving that around to different sets in the world, it's important that they have that information. So this one, we built it so that the user will arrive, they'll find the film they're on, they'll then go to the dashboard and they can see where they are tracked for each part of the process. So they, if they're on target, it's all rag rated. They can see where they're behind. They can see it just in a quick view. This is the Ashgate one. So this is where we're going with this one. So because SharePoint knows who you are, because of the Active Directory, everybody is named on the site. So for this one, the user turns up and it says, hello, Sophie, in this instance, check out the latest company news, and that will drive them to the latest news. Then they've got clear, simple boxes that will take them to different parts of the site. So if we think about what they have at the moment versus where they are, where they're going, it's chalk and cheese. This is much more appealing, much more engaging. And then behind it, as you can see in the upper areas and down the bottom there are news items that they go to, and there'll be, you know, images for each one. There'll be a short piece of text. And then because SharePoint is all about engagement and all about understanding whether people are reading what you're doing and you're able to follow it up, this has a like. You can like the story, you can add a comment to it so you become engaged with it. And this all helps for the user to understand what stories are people really liking, what work are they liking, what information is there that's good, and how can they tailor it better to ensure that people come back. And then simple things like on the right hand side, there's a workspace. So we built in areas so that they know where the user was last, so they can click on that quickly and go to their latest workspace rather than having to delve deep into the site to think, I was on here doing something the other day. This one we built for HSBC, so it was their diversity and inclusion hub. And this is all about ensuring that it's simple, clear, easy to use. Inclusion is not just about whether your vision is partially visioned, so we need to ensure that the spacing is correct, the colors are correct, but things like the videos, all the videos have to ensure that they have subtitles on, because actually you could be working in a busy cafe and you can't hear anything, but you can read the subtitles. So it's all about how you interact with the site and interact quickly. So again, SharePoint in a very different way to provide all that information around different areas of their diversity and inclusion program. For Diageo, we built their Mosaic site. Again, it was branded as a name. So this actually is their 4th incarnation of the site. So they started this one back in 2007 and have been through lots of variations. But now they're on SharePoint Modern. They've decided that it needs to be really simple. So in previous incarnations, all the individual sites for the individual parts of the business were uniquely designed. They were quite complex. They fit a similar structure, but everybody wanted something that was unique because we wanted to make our site different to everybody else's. But now they said we're not having any more of that. It takes too long, it's too complicated, and what we want is a really simple structure. So every site has a simple banner, and then it just follows down from there with a block of text, and then every subhead fits into a colored bar, and it just fits down the page, so that the whole site has a very unique, very uniformed style and design that everybody can understand. And there are no unique areas. It's all structured. It's like kids at school. They're all in school uniforms rather than somebody coming in their Armani top and their Adidas trainers. Everybody's in black shoes, school uniform. So what can we have? What do clients say that is challenging for us? So, and I'm sure everybody gets this. I'll know it when I see it, or you tell me what it is and I'll know it. So you have to go around the hoops. They can't tell you why they don't like something. You just have to keep working at it till you hopefully get there. Particularly with web design and on SharePoint in particular, somebody will say, I know it can be done. I've seen it somewhere. Well, that doesn't help. If I don't think it's possible, you need to tell me exactly where you think you've seen it so that I can look at it and say, that's on an outside website, you can't do it in SharePoint, or actually, I really wasn't aware that was in SharePoint, but I'm glad you pointed it out. I've had several times, my wife doesn't like that color. You spent all this time designing something and you've come up with all the color tones, and somebody somewhere says, I don't like that. So you have to redesign the entire thing because they don't like the color. Can I see another option? Well, yeah, that speaks for itself. That's just endlessly going on and on. You know what I like. That we hear that a lot. I work with my clients and I have a long history with my clients, but all very well knowing what they like, but I don't know what they need in that particular instance. And that's why a brief is really important. We talk about an analogy of a bridge. So if my client says, I need a bridge and you know what I like, how do I design a bridge? is it going over a stream, a river? Is it going over a road? Is it going to take foot traffic, lorries, cars, water, trains? How far is the expanse? What sort of thing do you like? So that's why a brief is really important. You know what I like is not very helpful. You design all sorts of things, and they say, "Oh, can I have a bit from here and a bit from there?" And that becomes a challenge in itself as well, because you're taking apart two different parts of the design and then putting it back together again. And effectively, you're starting again. This one, I'm sure all of us have heard somewhere in our business life. I won't hold you to it, but off the top of your head, what are the likely costs? You're on a hiding to nothing with that. You'll never get it right. So I always have to say I can't do that. If I said, oh, it's going to cost you in the region of 20,000, for example, and it turns out to be 40,000 because they want everything in it, and they'll say, oh, well, but you told me it was only 20k, or I'll tell them it's 40k, and they'll say, well, it's too expensive, I'm not interested. So you're on a hiding to nothing, and I'm sure we've all come across that. And then one that I had from one client, she said to me, can you make me look thinner in Photoshop, which was not the thing to do because it affected everything. But it was just one of those client comments that I thought was quite interesting, as stuck with me over the years. KISS, no, not that kind of KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. That's the mantra that I work with all the time. As many of you probably know, it was first noted by the US Navy in the 1960s. But systems work much better if they're kept simple. Design works much better if it's simple. Anything that's overcomplicated becomes a real challenge. So even if you're starting your intranet site, you should build it simply to start with, and then add to it and add the complexity once you have the users in it. There's no point in building a really complex site that nobody's going to use because you've not engaged the user. Start small, keep it simple, and then build on it so that you build that user engagement. There is a giveaway with this, with our presentation. It talks about the success for SharePoint. There's a step-by-step guide to help you build your project, work with your designer, and create the best project that you can get. I believe that Nigel is going to email everybody in the Phraktion group a copy, so you'll all get a copy of that. If there are any non-members here, could you either drop a message in the chat, or could you message Nigel directly, please? And then thank you for listening. That's me. That was it. That's all there is. I hope I haven't droned on too much for you. And then if we have any questions from anybody, so there's some.
Well, thank you, Mark, for a fascinating presentation focused around SharePoint. I mean, I have to say, I saw this previously, and I was almost shocked that you could actually do these things with SharePoint. I just saw it as a big challenge of lots of folders where I could hardly find anything that I needed in various folders. So this was quite an eye-opener for me, and really tells you what you can do if you design things nicely. So thank you for sharing that. So just really opening the floor for questions. If you wanted to come on, I know there's some chats online, but see if you'd like to come on into the discussion, that would be great.
Hi Mark, it's Paul.
Oh.
I put one on the chat. I'm guilty of building some dreadful SharePoint sites when I was at GSK. I think, to your point, training is correct, because we were all given about 10 minutes training and told that we needed to build SharePoints. We got halfway through, realized it was complicated, we gave up, leaving all these dead sites everywhere across the internet. One question to you is, when you come in, how tricky is it to work with the internal IT community? Because clearly you're going in mucking about with something central, where maybe you're going to do a much better job than the IT department. How's that work?
So it depends on the IT team and how open they are to somebody helping them externally. Often we get brought in because they are too busy. The IT team have their own work to do, their own solutions to do. They're fixing problems and covering all the 365 questions that they have, and actually building it is not necessarily their remit. They haven't got developers in the way that they can build it internally. If they have got developers who can do stuff internally, then I'm very happy to work with them. And actually, you know, I've had several cases where you start with a resistant IT team, and once you start to work with them, you start to talk about how you're going to build it and how you engage people and how they can be helped to do things. Then they'll come on board. It's about how you approach it and how you work with people. Very much, I'll work with the team that are there if they need us to work with it, or we'll bring our own team of developers in and we'll build it for them and put it on the platform. Early days, you obviously people are concerned about access. You know, as you know, SharePoint holds a lot of very secure information, and within pharma businesses, some of that is really business critical. But once you build that relationship and you build the trust, then they're happy to let you in. They're happy to give you that access, because you obviously do need that access in order to be able to build the site properly. But as you work through that initial stage of the workshop and you drill down into what they need, they can start to see what is required and how that impacts on the business, and therefore they're more engaged to allow you to get involved in the site and allows you to build that development.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone with any other questions brave enough to come online?
Yeah, this is
Sanjay,
I have just a follow-up question on Paul's. You know, I also work in the commercial area or worked in the commercial in the past extensively. And so in terms of, you know, working with the agency or a brand team, how do you work with them? Because obviously you have to, when they have their own ideas about, you know, the logo or what the brand is going to be, particularly big pharma, where they have established structure. How would you work around that if they have their own internal expectations?
So actually, our biggest challenge is the client themselves. So if, for example, we're working with the HR team, I use them as an example, to be anybody, the HR team, and they want their area to look different and to stand out. Actually, that's the bigger challenge than working with the corporate guidelines. As you will have seen from my board of clients that I've worked with a lot of big clients, and I'm used to working with their corporate guidelines. So you just take the corporate guidelines, you talk about how they can use it, and you work with the internal team to ensure that you're not breaking any guides, that everything you do fits the right thing. So you just, you know, it's just working out how you can be creative within their guidelines, because guidelines are not there to make it difficult for you. They're there just to ensure that that brand security is always present in everything that you do. So ensuring that we use the logo in the right size, the right color, the right amount of space, we use the right fonts, we use the right color palette. And after that, it's then quite open. Once you work out that those are the particular areas you need to meet, and they're obviously different to every business, you can really be quite creative around it. But we always ensure that once we've designed something, it goes to the corporate brand team to ensure, because we're working with such big businesses, it goes to the corporate brand team and they will look at it and they will comment. And generally, we're pretty good. We've lost work to some other agencies who have gone wild with the brand and gone wild with the design. They've gone really off topic. And then that particular person within the business has got hauled over the coals because they've gone off brand. But we've lost it because we said, look, we've got to stay within the brand guidelines. That's key. And I think over the years that's dropped off. More people are much more understanding that actually staying within brand is important, and that's why I showed that shell one in the wrong colours. Some people say, well, why can't I do that? I just want it to be different. I just want it to look something away from the normal brand. So, for example, working with HSBC, everything is red and black to the point where it becomes a bit blinding, because everything everywhere you see is red and black. But they won't let you change away from that. So you just have to work with it and find ways around that to make it creative and interesting for the end user.
Thanks.
Tony, I think you have your hand up there.
I found how to use the technology. It only took me the hour. It was useful for the hour that I wasn't on the call previously. Mark, thank you for that. The question that I had was really, you get this built. How do you then drive engagement? So in the discussions that you have, you're brought on to design and implement a SharePoint. do they keep you on to drive that engagement? And I mean, it's almost like that measure of success, isn't it? Is utilization of any kind of platform these days. So I'm just kind of interested about where, do you see a continuation in your work beyond that initial implementation, or do you just simply have to bail out because it's taken back into somewhere else?
Again, like all these things, depends on the client. Generally, they take it over once you've built it and you've given them the tools to be able to work with it. Particularly if it was, so for example, like that HSBC diversity tool that went back in house. There was the engagement was driven by adding events and news items and new videos, and that's all the things that they would drive to bring traffic to it. For example, the Otsuka site that I'm working with now, I will stay on board with them and help them to drive engagement by creating new graphics, creating new imagery, ensuring that when we add stuff to the page, it's added correctly, because it goes back to if the client doesn't want, if the client's frightened by it or doesn't want to do it, often it's not their day job. They're employed to be accountants or scientists or whatever their day job is. They're not employed to be web developers to build web pages. So often we'll provide a support contract that basically says, it'll take me 15 minutes to put a new image up and a bit of text, but it'll take you 2 hours because you can't remember how to use SharePoint because you haven't used it for 6 months. And those sorts of things are really important. People are starting to come back. SharePoint is very good. You can do everything yourself. You don't need a designer. You don't need a designer up front. You don't need a designer at the back end. But I think I've shown that actually use of a designer is helpful to bring the site to life. And then after that, it's useful to have a maintenance contract, because in the long run, it's cheaper. If I can do something in 15 minutes that takes you an hour or 2 hours, then actually it's good use of company time and money to let you do your day job and let me fix the issue.
No, thank you. I was going to follow up and say, I think it's one of those things. It's really interesting as the references you've made. This fits in very, very large dispersed corporate environments, but I can see a real need here, particularly as we look at the very fast uptick in medtech, where a lot of organizations are going to hit that point that they need to actually look at scale up. And from what you've said, putting this kind of infrastructure in early, well, it's not really infrastructure, it's quite simple nowadays, and then keeping on top of it is going to work much better than leaving it further down the line when everybody's had their own version of how they think it should look. So I think although we've referenced lots of large companies, I can see this for all of those of us that are working in much smaller businesses as well, as an opportunity of how they actually structure and drive their development processes as well from quite early stages.
Yeah, I mean, one of my clients, they've got, they're about 200, 250 people at the moment, but they've got a site in America, they've got a site in Germany, and they've got a site here in the UK. And using their intranet is their way to pull everybody together and ensure that they are using and sharing the same information. It's very easy to sit in a silo in the US and say, oh yeah, no, we've got our own intranet and we've dumped all of our stuff on there, and then people can't access it or people can't share that information. Where if it's in that central SharePoint environment that everybody wants to go to, you have a single source of truth where people will be able to find that one document that everybody's worked on, and because every document is tracked, you've got the latest version. So it just ensures that everybody works with the latest information rather than, and as you know, in the pharma industry, if you put out something that's old or incorrect, it can be quite catastrophic. So it just ensures you can stay on top of everything and have everything correct.
I think the big hook there from Tony is the remote working, Mark.
Yes.
I think suddenly it's lighting up my idea. The amount of, and I think this is going to be resonant for Phraktion. We're dealing with companies that are scaling internationally with a very agile structure. So very remote teams trying to centralize what they're doing. And I think, whilst I'm not a big fan of SharePoint, but getting it right is really important, because we've got teams that don't physically get together or can't get together just because the whole way of agile structure. So this has been interesting today, because I have a feeling there'll be work flowing your way, Mark, where we get companies that don't realize the potential of getting this right early.
Yeah, it is, and that's those couple of examples that I showed were a case where they literally just, oh, we need SharePoint, we're going to start, and they throw things at the page, and it just grows. And I use the expression the Wild West. People just,
Yeah,
like the original days, they just, oh, let's just chuck this at it, it'll be fine. And it's very difficult if you get it wrong to start with. It's very difficult to pull it back to be right in the first place. And I heard you say that you're not a big fan of SharePoint. I have to be honest, when I started, I was not a big fan of SharePoint. I work on a Mac, I'm a designer. SharePoint is not for me. But the more you work with it, the more you understand the level you can get to and what you can do with it and how much people will engage with it if it's done properly.
yeah.
Then actually, I've become a real advocate of SharePoint.
Now, your examples make it shine, Mark. I think Nigel and I both worked at GSK for a while. I think GSK went SharePoint mad, and everybody was given the keys to the bloody, the computer, and everybody ruined it, bent it out of shape, then got bored and left. Yeah. So I think what I've seen today is the before and after, and I think the after is quite invigorating to see what it can look like, because it does look slick. And it never looked like when we were there.
Exactly that. So other pharmaceutical companies are available, of course. But
yes, of course.
but that, you're right, Paul. I mean, that was a real eye opener. That how you can really mould through design that SharePoints that work so much more efficiently to your benefit and provide a consistent approach, and people actually go in there knowing where to find the information. So that's very clear, Mark, and thanks for sharing that. I mean, I'm just conscious of time. I don't know if anybody else has any questions today. Just I was going to ask a general point, maybe, Mark, around design. You said yourself up front that you're not a scientist, and perhaps as a inverted commas scientist myself, I only see that as a good thing, believe me, Mark. But probably there's lots of very good science out there, but often poorly communicated. Very complicated diagrams, too much verbatim around it. What's your experience there in actually helping scientists actually communicate their science in a better way through design? Any general comments, hints and tips around that, do you think?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. So it goes back to people overcomplicate things, and so we can simplify your diagrams for you, bring it to life with. So people will go, oh, let's make it colourful, and they'll throw every colour at it. So it's a kaleidoscope of everything in the rainbow and beyond. You say, no, just pare it back, simplify it. Make sure it gets back to your balance of your hotspots. What's important, what isn't important, and you just change the balance of the diagram. Or those documents that I showed, I thought that was really pertinent for you guys, because it goes from, this is a really complicated document that if you're scientist to scientist and you know what you're talking about, that's fine. You can read it, you're quite happy. But if you're going from scientist to company director, he doesn't want that level. He wants the detail, but he just doesn't need it in that way. So it's simplifying it and bringing it back to a level that's colourful and easy. And it can only be very simple things. As you know, Nigel, I changed your homepage. I literally changed the centered text to range left. I changed the balance of the size of them. Mm-hmm. And it's just simple things. It's just that eye to say, that doesn't quite work. But if you just do this simple thing, it will make it more appealing to the user. And everybody's different. So you have to tackle every person in a different way. They will have different ideas. And some people, you work with a different scientist who wants things done this way and done that way. But that's part of the skill of a designer, to work with their client, to understand what they want and build that relationship. Right. I'm very much I've never had a client and run away from them. Here it is, huge cost. Isn't that great? I've gone. Mm-hmm. Some of my clients I've had for 15, 20 years, it's building that relationship, and it is understanding what they want and working with them. I don't want to, make a quick buck and run. I want that longevity, and that's what you should get from all your designers. You should have longevity. All business relationships, in my opinion, they should be about trust and about, you work with people, you buy from people. It's about that experience. You are your brand, and you buy from that person, not there's lots of designers out there. There's lots of scientists out there. There's lots of businesses that do what everybody else does. You've got to find that reason why they're going to come to you and stay with you, and you give them that good result.
Thank you, Mark. Maybe keep it simple, stupid is the absolute take-home
It's the
message.
takeaway. If everybody can take away, keep
Answer
it simple,
for that,
stupid,
but,
I'm happy.
there we go. Sorry, maybe Jeff, is there another question, Jeff? Sorry.
Yeah, if we have a couple minutes left, I just
Yeah,
wanted
sure.
to ask you a little bit about your experiences using it as a project management tool, because it's historically not one of the tools that people use for project management. So, I mean, what's your experience with that? And can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so in the example that we've had, the project manager has control of the system, and we'll build the project, we'll put all the data on there, we'll manage what goes on it, and then they manage the time schedule. But because of the way we built the dashboard, they're then able to make that a project tool that they can share with people easily. And then people at different levels have different level of access to be able to add data, share data. So in that particular example, they can put a file on there, and they can work together on it within the business, but the client doesn't see it until the project manager clicks a different button and says the client now has access to this, and then the client can then work on that document with the team. And it's always the latest version to ensure that you're never missing anything. So in that respect, it's working really well as a project management tool for that particular client.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Any final thoughts, comments, questions? Delighted. Thumbs up from Paul Reynolds there, so thank you for that, Paul. And most importantly, thank you, Mark, for your time and efforts into today's webinar. I know you've put an incredible amount of effort into that, so it is hugely appreciated.
Thank you, everybody, for bearing with me and listening to me waffle on for ages. I hope it was interesting at some point for some things. I know that there's some real. It's a very broad spectrum of what's it's a very broad subject. So we can drill down endlessly, but I think hopefully that's given people a really good flavour of what can be done and given them some excitement to say, actually, this is a product that we could work with.